I'm Amanda McGill-Johnson with Nebraska Cures. Our organization promotes, supports, and advocates for health science research for the betterment of our health and for our economy. This program today is Talking Research, which is designed to educate Nebraskans about just the awesome research happening around our state. And this month, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Kate Cooper here with us from UNO. She's an assistant professor in the School of Interdisciplinary Informatics, and she's been a member of their bioinformatics research group since 2005. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Cooper.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And as we go on, for folks who may be viewing this live, feel free to drop any questions that you might have in the comments. This will also be posted later on our website and our YouTube channel. I'm going to start by getting the ball rolling by asking about some terms in relation to this. Like, I was not familiar with bioinformatics before I started researching your work. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So the question of what is bioinformatics is almost always the first question I get. And it's a good question. It's a new field, so a lot of people are not particularly aware of it. The bioinformatics discipline itself came about as a result of a number of scientific and technological breakthroughs that kind of happened in perfect succession to result in this field. In bioinformatics, we really harness the power of computer science and databases and statistics, a little bit of calculus every once in a while, to analyze the enormous volume of biomedical data that's being generated by scientific labs and groups across the world. Many people, some people at least, are familiar with the Human Genome Project, which was a huge federally funded project. It was first published, a draft of it was published in 2001. $3 billion project. They actually came in under budget, is what we always hear about.
Amazing, right?
I know. And that was allowing us a project that allowed us to read the book of human DNA for the first time. You can imagine that as a child learns to read, then this whole library of books becomes available to them, right, for them to indulge themselves in. The Human Genome Project was us reading the book of human DNA for the first time and becoming proficient in reading the book of human DNA. So once we can actually understand what an individual's DNA looks like, we can start to compare genomes and compare books and identify where they're different and which of those differences are potentially causing disease or going to give us a doorway for treatments for disease or that sort of thing. The problem with the human genome is that it's incredibly large. It's about 3.2 billion characters. So you can imagine a 3.2 billion character book is going to be very long. It's about, if you were to download it, it's roughly 6 gigabytes of data, which is like 2 movies. So to be able to compare genomes between people and find these genetic causes of disease or genetic factors that influence disease, we really do need programming, databases. Here at UNO, I use high performance computing with the Holland Computing Center. We really need a ton of computing power. This is research you can't just do with a lab notebook anymore. So that is how bioinformatics really emerged. And with that, we now train a workforce that can just handle these very, very large biomedical data sets, for lack of a better way to say it.
Wow, that's impressive. And it's like the Human Genome Project 20th anniversary, I guess.
Yeah, it's coming up. I don't know where the party is, but I'd like to go. So
I remember learning about that way back when I was in college, and it's interesting to see how that's evolved. And it is like, it takes a lot of time to weed through there. Like I imagine there were people who would hope that we'd have some big breakthroughs in certain areas, but it takes
exactly
time.
Right. They thought it would be like one and done. And of course, that's never the case in biology. So you're absolutely right.
It's ever evolving and learning. So the title of this particular presentation today is Information Technology for Consumer Health, Linking Diet and the Microbiome with Informatics. So for starters, talk about what a microbiome is for those of us who might not be super familiar with that term.
Sure. So in general, a microbiome is just a collection of microbes, generally bacteria, but it can include other very small organisms. Those microbes exist as a community and can be found in a wide variety of places. So one of the big topics right now is the human gut microbiome, which is the microbiome that's present in the human gastrointestinal tract. But we can study the microbiomes, excuse me, of soil, the oral microbiome, so your mouth. There's a breast milk microbiome. So microbiomes are popping up everywhere. Everyone's studying them because they're really, really having a lot of impact in research. I specifically have been doing work with the human gut microbiome, which again is that community of microbes that lives in your digestive tract. And our understanding of the microbiome is relatively new. I think it was in the 2000s when we really discovered and named this kind of organ, this microbiome. And the National Institutes of Health actually formalized it as the Human Microbiome Project in 2008. That has since been wound down, but it's been transformative for microbiome research. My research and the research that I, with my colleagues, the research of my colleagues, is trying to understand at that very basic level, what is the relationship between diet and our microbiome? We are still trying to learn how diet affects the microbiome. Nutrition research is a very, very complicated field. It's really hard to do. You can't really lock people in a room for 50 years and feed them the same thing, right? So it's really hard to untangle that. Similarly, the scientific community is still looking into how do we identify a healthy microbiome and an unhealthy microbiome? That's another thing that we thought it would be easy, and it's really not. There's a huge diversity in what your microbiome can look like, and it's not very clear what defines a healthy one.
Fascinating. So like me and my husband may have very different microbiomes or little
Yes.
things living in us, the bacteria.
Absolutely. And it's short term as well. So you can change your diet, and sometimes, I mean, this is still being very, well studied or currently studied, but you can change your diet and then see a change in your microbiome a couple of days later. And the question is, do those changes persist if you change your diet back, or do they change back as soon as you change your diet again? So we're still learning these things.
Okay, so how do scientists hope then that maybe understanding the microbiome will help prevent diseases, and what kind of research is happening in that space?
So it's a really good question. I am very fortunate in my bioinformatics work. I do some sort of service-based roles, and then I also drive my own research. So in that service type role, I work with wonderful collaborators at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, for example, who are studying the microbiome in pancreatic cancer and in colorectal cancer. And the goal there, there's been some studies already that have shown that you can have patients who respond to a certain treatment, and then patients who don't respond to a certain treatment, and that there are differences in their microbiome that we may be able to capture and then say this profile is associated with a patient who would not respond to treatment. Of course, if we can go back earlier in the process and identify those patients who won't be responding to treatment or to a specific therapeutic, we can save some time, right, in that cancer treatment process by saying this drug is not going to work for this person, or alternatively, this drug could be working for this person. So that it's just another powerful tool that we can add to that toolbox, so that as a physician develops that personalized plan for how they're going to treat their patient, we can give them some extra information that can help them make that treatment more effective. We're also interested in learning more about how the microbiome can be used as a tool for individuals, just as consumers of food, right? We are interested in learning how we can give that information back to consumers and help them manage their diet in a more personalized way, so that they can have higher quality of life, especially as they age, and also hopefully prevent disease.
Is this kind of where like the probiotic world kind of is targeted at this?
Yes, probiotics, prebiotics. So, prebiotics are what do your microbes eat, and probiotics are kind of what can you take that kind of just go through your system. So, all of these things are currently, it's a very, very hot topic in science right now. But I think as we continue to study it, especially the relationship between the microbiome, diet, microbiome, and the gut-brain axis, all of these things will become more clear. It's just we're just so early in the field, and we actually need more workforce to help us gather and collect and analyze all this data. We don't have enough. So that's another challenge we're facing.
Yeah, like technology can be really great and provide all of this great data, but it takes a lot of time to sort through it.
Yes.
come to conclusions based upon it. And I know there are already a lot of like products on the market, that are kind of targeted in this area. And so it will be interesting, and it's important to remember this is new that we're learning about, and hopefully have even better targeted products,
Yes.
moving forward too.
Absolutely. And we do, I attend talks with the FDA and the USDA. I mean, everyone's involved in this because especially when we take it back to the consumer, you want to make sure that products are safe and proven to do what you say they're going to do and that sort of thing.
So how, you said you work with folks at UNMC, other places, how is the research on the microbiome conducted?
So the really good question from a very technical perspective. All of my research is team-based. A bioinformatician does not work alone, of course. I think that's the case for everyone now, but just to make sure I say it, I have collaborators, for example, at UNMC who collect tissue samples or fecal samples, whatever. If it's a gut microbiome, it's going to be like a fecal sample. But you can also, if you're doing a soil microbiome analysis, you can just collect some soil in the field. So we have samples that are collected through our collaborators. We then have them read that DNA, like I was talking about the Human Genome Project. They sequence the DNA of that microbiome through a process called metagenomic sequencing. That is done through a core facility. We use the UNMC sequencing core facility, but there's many of them out there that one could use. We use UNMC. And then the UNMC core facility will give me the sequencing data, the central collection of DNA, the book of DNA, and then me and my students in my lab will analyze it. And when we're analyzing it, we are in a dry lab. We have computers. I have done some wet lab work, but I wasn't great at it, which is why I'm in this field. It's essentially a computer lab where we use programming languages like Python, R, SQL. We use community databases that are available. The USDA has a food database that we use. The National Institute of Health has a database of databases that we use. And we also use high performance computing resources. So places like the Holland Computing Center that give us access to really, really, really powerful data analysis capabilities. And from there, we do that analysis to look at how many microbes, are in the microbiome. Which ones are potentially harmful. We have some idea of what those look like. And are they changing? What is the relationship between them? So we really try to quantify what's actually in this microbiome and what do we know about it already. It's really basic from a microbiome analysis level, but that's where the field is.
Okay. So talk to us just even more about health informatics and other ways that it can be used to potentially improve our health.
Yeah, so this bioinformatics and health informatics kind of tend to fall, at least in my circle, under this umbrella term of biomedical informatics, where we're using computer science, databases, statistics to analyze a huge amount of data. As for my perspective, for my individual research that I drive, human nutritional research is particularly challenging in part because of the variety found in our diets. As we study diet and its influence on the microbiome, I have also become interested in how consumers, kind of like I mentioned before, use that information available to them, like a food product label, nutrition facts panel, ingredients list, what's the name of the product, right? You can see sometimes if it's in the ice cream aisle at the grocery store, sometimes it's called ice cream and sometimes it's called like dairy dessert. And what's the difference? That's more of a food science thing. But we want to learn a little bit more through health informatics. How do consumers understand that information? How do they use that information? And how can we make it more accessible? The USDA has a database, like I mentioned now, where every food product that's distributed in the United States has that information available. And we can use natural language processing and text mining to try to understand how would the consumer look at, for example, an ingredients list. And would they be able to understand what each ingredient is?
Yeah,
right?
and a lot of it just seems over the average person's head.
It is, right? So one of the things we'd like to do with health informatics is say, well, when we consent a patient in a clinic to a procedure, that has to be, they aim to write those at like an 8th grade reading level or lower, right? So ideally, that would be really useful if we could do that for food products too, or empower the people who make and distribute food to create labels that are readable for the consumer. So in that way, we can, again, make food products, make things that are designed for consumers, anything, not just food products, but anything designed for consumer health, more accessible for consumers. And we really need the informatics component to be able to do that.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'm thinking about like a typical American, not that there is a typical American diet, but compared to maybe some other places in the world. Are there people looking at how those different diet habits in different parts of the world are impacting the microbiome?
Absolutely. I have, they're doing that for individuals. That's I have a student doing a review on that right now. Actually, I'd be happy to send it to you. Um, and I also have a collaborator who is doing that for primates as well, looking at captive gorillas, for example. How does their differences between their diet link back to the microbiome? So it's a very, very hot topic right now. And we have a ton of data. We have means to collect data. Again, the biggest thing is how do we do it, working through it, understanding it, working in a team-based environment for these scientists, and also training a workforce that can do these things. There's a lot of training to get to that point, but we need people in the workforce globally, not just here.
Yeah. And I struggle to like, I think there's this sense that, oh, we have this great technology and these big computers. So why don't we just put the numbers in there and it shoots out something useful to us? But it's not that simple, is it? Like there are people like you behind the scenes.
Yeah, we need people who are trained in multiple disciplines, and that takes time, and it takes mentorship, and it takes support, and it really is it's something that we need to do from a community level in my humble opinion.
What got you down this track professionally?
That's a great question. So I originally, when I was 8, I had a family member diagnosed with breast cancer. And in addition to that being just a transformative experience personally, it also got me interested in why does cancer happen, and understanding, learning through that process of a family member having cancer when I was very young. That genes can cause disease or be a factor in disease, and so can environment. But one of the most frustrating things as a young child was to understand we don't know why people get cancer all the time, and it's not always preventable. So I became interested in genetics in that way. And then when I enrolled, I got my undergraduate degree from UNO. And when I enrolled, I talked to the, at that time, Associate Dean, Dr. Hisham Ali. He later became Dean and has now just stepped down. He sat down with me and I kind of told him my interests. And I said, I might want to be a physician, but I'm not sure. I like computers. And he said, I have a degree that would work for you. And he told me about it. But I had one programming class in high school. I think I took Visual Basic, which is, I learned C++ in my undergraduate degree. And I said, I'm worried. I know how to fix my computer at home when it, can't connect to AOL or whatever it was at the time, but I don't know how to program them. And I'm worried I'm not smart enough. And he said, you just show up, we will teach you. That's the whole point. And he said, I've never met anyone who can't learn computer science. You just have to show up. So the combination of those two things resulted in me getting down this path. I was afforded a bunch of opportunities by advocates and mentors that I had, and it really got me into research in grad school, and the rest is history, as they say.
Well, tell me a little bit then about what it is to be a woman in a STEM field, and advice or thoughts you have for other women who are interested in pursuing similar careers.
Yeah, so I think I am in a very fortunate situation at UNO. I think I am very fortunate to be here because I have support. I have colleagues who are interested in supporting women in STEM. I've had a lot of advocates, especially like I mentioned as a student. I've had advocates, I've had mentors, I've had people say to me, you should apply for this opportunity. You should go for this. You'd be really qualified. Where I was thinking to myself, there's no chance. So those opportunities that I was encouraged to go for have been transformative for my career. It's the reason why I'm in this current role. I was not going to apply for my current job. And then someone said, you really should. And lo and behold, I got it. So I'm very fortunate to be here because we have a very a good environment for people advocating for others and mentorship and that sort of thing. There's so much value for our students in representation and having mentors who will champion them and support their career interests and really getting to know them and sitting down with them. So we're afforded that opportunity here. Now that I'm in the position where I can advocate for others, my kind of big points that I give to them are: one, talk if you're a student, talk to your instructors. I was always afraid to do that, and I thought I'd be bothering them. I'm certain I
Intimidating.
probably,
Yeah.
maybe some would have been bothered, but majority, I love talking to students, and I wish more of them would reach out. I don't want to be the overarching and be like going out, I don't want to be the overbearing, but I would wish for them to do that. I tell my students or anyone who asks me to apply for jobs, even when you don't think you're fully qualified. As someone who's on the hiring side more often than not now, than on the applying side, I know that the majority of candidates that we see don't have all the qualifications that we ask for, and therefore, you should be applying, even if you only have part of the qualifications. You might be very competitive. You probably are very competitive. And the last thing I try to tell them is try to find a mentor or an advocate or a champion who will support you in a way that makes you feel like you are actually being supported and creates an inclusive environment. Once they are themselves in that role, they can finally get the confidence and power, and they can amplify that effect of supporting others and lifting other people up and saying, hey, here's an opportunity you should go for. So I really think that trying to empower them with that information, like, you're in a position now where you can grow and then, amplify your impact, really helps them understand, like, it, all you have to do is find someone who will help you out, and then you can get there as well. And then we can continue to, like I said, amplify that effect. So mentorship is the big one. I try to find someone who will help you out, but who will do it and actually give you time and their support and will actually champion for you.
I hear that a lot from women in STEM, that mentorship and sponsorship piece, is a term that maybe some like to use too, since it means taking on a little bit more of a role. Going back to your work for a moment, how has the pandemic impacted what you do? And I think your lab's been working a little bit on crunching data related to that as well.
Absolutely. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, I did some interviews, for example, where I was trying to talk about open science and how will bioinformatics be used in the pandemic. We know this now. There are labs everywhere who are collecting nose swabs. Everyone's probably had a nose swab at this point. And they are collecting genomic data about SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. The thing I was trying to get across in that type of interview, that kind of situation, is this data is available. It's being made available by scientists. There's a broad scientific community who's interested in sharing data for the purpose of contributing to public health and helping us identify, for example, when variants are emerging. So that's something we do with bioinformatics, is genomic surveillance, which is essentially saying, how is the virus mutating and what variants are emerging? And then that information can be fed back to public health officials, right? For example, to say, hey, this is something you need to be watching for, give them an early alert type thing. So this information becomes useful for them. In terms of the impact on my work, I am not patient facing, and I'm not actually part of the pandemic response locally, regionally, anything like that. I'm a science educator, right? So I am involved in that role. And as part of that, I train students, right? In a typical scenario, I train students on the scientific method, how to read papers, how to interpret literature that comes through, how to identify studies that maybe are not well designed, and how to sort through all of the SARS-CoV-2 literature. There's been so many papers that have come out. So even wading through that, how does one do that? So I'm proficient in understanding the literature. I understand the scientific method. And as a result of that, a lot of the pandemic impact on me from my professional perspective has been in educating not only my students, but anyone who knows that I kind of work adjacent to this field, and anyone who asks me what the scientific research process looks like, and why can't we trust X source, or why should we trust X source. I think a lot of the process of research, which is why I love what you're doing with this talking series, a lot of the research process is kind of hidden behind a veil. I don't know that a lot of my friends and family realize that I go to conferences not just to go on vacation, but to talk about science and what I'm doing with other people, and kind of bounce ideas off of them and get a confidence check and saying, does this make sense the way I'm going to do that? I mean, there's a lot of things that are involved in scientific research just beyond a Google search. So I think that my impact, the pandemic impact on me, has really just been amplifying, again, my informal science education duties, which I'm happy to do. I'm very happy to do, so that I can help anyone who's interested understand what's actually happening, because it's a really scary time for people, and trying to figure out what is actually happening. So I hope I've been a little bit of a science educator for not just my students in the pandemic.
Absolutely. And thank you for doing that, because I just see so many people, it's in my own world, who are good people who are trying to sort through information, and with the internet and social media, there's a lot of information out there, and some of it is more sound than others. But for the average person, it's really difficult to tell which pieces should be taken more seriously than others. And so yes, we're trying to work on that as an organization, and hopefully in the future get more information out there for people that's understandable. But it means having great scientists like yourself too, right? And science
I appreciate that.
folks who
Yeah.
are out there also trying to help demystify and help people understand that what we know through science is ever changing, and that it's important to ask questions and keep evolving and learning more and doing more and more research. So thank you for all that you do on that front.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's a lot of people don't realize the amount of training that goes into sorting through all that. It's a long process. So it's not expected that someone who's not a scientist in the field would be able to do it. So it's something that it's very helpful when we talk about it openly, I think, because then they start to understand it's not your job to necessarily go through all that information. That's why we have experts like your physician and scientists who can do that for you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cooper. We appreciate everything that you do and for taking 30 minutes out of your day to visit with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure, and I really enjoyed it.
All right. Take care.